Hey.
All right. Um, Welcome everybody. This is the 10th annual virtual residency workshop. It is June 26th, 2024. This is Wednesday, and our first session today, we're very excited to have Cyber Ambassadors session. Let's talk, communicating that there's a problem. And our presenters are Sue Hall from Cal State Sacramento and Paul Snyder from Kansas State University. So take it away, Sue and Paul.
Thank you. Just a little bit of background on us. First, me, I'm Sue Hall. I've been a faculty member at Cal State Sacramento for decades. I'm in the Department of Mechanical Engineering, but I'm a material scientist. So I am not, I really need a lot of support from IT folks, but that's not my expertise. But we're all part of the same community, so that's why we're doing this. Paul?
Morning, everybody. So I'm Paul Snyder. I'm a professor of practice at Kansas State University in the College of Engineering. I've been here 2 years, worked for industry for 30 years prior to that. Definitely in need of IT support. I had trouble joining the Zoom meeting just a few minutes before that. IT came knocking on my door to simplify the process for me, which I'm greatly appreciated. Uh, Quick fun fact about me, June 26th is my birthday. So looking forward to spending my birthday morning with you all.
So we should have some happy birthdays in the chat for Paul.
Thank you.
And one more thing about the chat, I seem to be having a little bit of difficulty when I go to the presenter view, I'm not able to see the chat. So if somebody's got an answer for that, that would be helpful. And you could maybe just shout it out to me because I'm going to want to start going here. So somebody let me know what to do. But I'm going to share my,
So
go ahead.
generally speaking,
Yes.
it's helpful to have somebody else have eyes on it because there's no good solution. Also, can someone let me know when the happy birthdays have stopped because it's animated and that is a problem for me. Thanks.
I've got my eyes on the chat, Sue, and it's definitely slowed down. Appreciate all the birthday wishes.
Cool.
Thank you. And we will be mindful of that. If there are any issues, please speak up, because the way this is going to work, since Paul and I are not in the same location, I'm going to be running the slides. And since the way my configuration seems to be, I can't really see the chat. So I'm going to be relying on Paul. But this is a interactive session. Seriously, we do these things in person lots of times, and we talk back and forth to the participants very easily. So just because we're all on Zoom, please don't feel like you need to not call out to us to let us know that there's something going on. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we will get started on this. So the name of our presentation is Let's Talk. We're going to be talking about problems, mostly problems in the workplace, but as you know, because you're all professionals, sometimes those things can spill over. As we've introduced ourselves, I'm Sue, and Paul is doing this, and then we also have one of our fellow facilitators, Jason Sims, who's here on Zoom, just to make sure that in case something happens, he's going to be in here to step in if we need a problem or if we have a problem. We want to really quickly acknowledge the hard work that was done by the leaders of our group, Katie Colbury and Dirk Colbury, who created this curriculum. It's based on some curriculum that was developed 30, 40 years ago, and it's been updated and modernized and made even stronger. And they were supported to do this work by a National Science Foundation grant. This material has three sort of general areas: teaming up, speaking up, and leading the change. So it is really all about building stronger relationships in the workplace. And we're doing this part about problems. So we want to be thinking about that. what we're going to do, and Paul's going to be helping with this a lot, is to use the way we do interactions over Zoom is to do something that we call chatter. So we'll ask some sort of a question, and then we'll count down 3, 2, 1, and then you'll hit your responses in the chat. Now, somebody said that creates a difficulty for them, and I'm not sure how to handle that. If there's maybe Henry, I don't know, do you have a suggestion?
I'm sorry for the using the chat to put in answers to things.
Well, someone indicated that when
No,
we
Sue, I think we're good because it's just some messages get animated, and I don't think that most of the responses that people will put in will be animated.
Got
So I
it.
think we're good to go.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you. That was Jason helping me out because I see. So when it was happy birthday, those got fancy things. Got it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Now we can go. So what we're going to do, we're going to ask a question. You get a chance to type something in the chat, but you don't hit enter until I say chat. So the question is, what interesting place will you visit this summer? Okay, 3, 2, 1, chat.
All right, we've got quite a few. The pool, Grand Canyon, Niagara Falls,
Whoa.
The Office,
That would be interesting.
Taylor Swift concert in Vienna, California Beach, Olympic.
All right, so we're all over pretty much the United States, it sounds like.
Yeah, global, India.
Oh,
West Virginia.
wonderful. And you did say something in Vienna, so. All righty, well, now you get the idea of the chat, and you also get an idea of the variety of folks we have in our audience. So that's really important. These are all your colleagues all over the world who are here to help you. Our learning goals for this meeting are to help you build your knowledge and abilities in the area, this particular area of problem solving. So we want to be able to define what our problem is, be able to clearly figure that out, and then figure out our effective communication to solve that problem. We're going to talk about 3 common types of problems, and then we're going to talk about communication styles and things that might impact that. We're going to have some illustrations and a little bit of a few examples about things that sometimes can cause difficulty. And then we're going to talk about areas or have you think about areas where you can apply these things. So we may call out to you and say, does anybody have an example of this? So our particular agenda for today, the first piece is about defining effective problem solving. The second is types of problems and solutions. And then we're going to talk about communication style and have a little practice. So how do we define problem? Clearly, there's all sorts of different ways. So we're going to do a chatter on that. So how do you define a problem? So we're going to do that 3, 2, 1 thing. So type in something. And let's go 3, 2, 1, chat.
Something that is wrong, not working, no resources. Talk with stakeholders. But the machine does not do what I'm thinking.
Those are really interesting. So some people, the way we're going to talk about it, some people are defining a problem, but some people are defining the real issues that are causing the problem. For instance, resources, or the machine's not doing what I think it should. So the definition of problem from the dictionary is a situation or that's regarded as harmful or needing to be dealt with. So it can be all sorts of things. That's why I say you can be having, even at work, it could go from financial or material resources, both monetary and physical. It could be other things like complications with making your case to the management, all sorts of things. a problem in something like mathematics or physics or engineering is often starting from your principles and then saying, what are my conditions and how do I get to the end? But clearly, in all of these cases, there's not just one solution. So for our purposes, we're defining a problem as being somewhere, like we want to kick that ball into the goal, and we've got a problem, a barrier, something that's causing us not to be able to get there. So we want to solve that problem. This isn't moving. And by creating a good solution. Now, there's a lot of solutions we could, for instance, in soccer, one thought would be if you didn't know the rules for soccer, you could say, or football around the world, you could just pick up the ball and run into the goal. That would get it there. But that's not an appropriate solution, and it doesn't solve the real problem, which is you're trying to get points in the game. So we have to create an effective solution. So what we're trying to do is think about how we're going to remove the barrier, get across the barrier, get around the barrier, whatever, find a solution to that problem. But then for us as professionals, we've got to implement a plan so that we can make that solution happen, because undoubtedly it's not going to be a problem that you can solve all by, or that you can get to the solution all by yourself. So because of that, you have to work with a variety of folks in your workplace, and you've got to maintain your relationships. And ideally, through any of these interactions, we want to try to build a stronger network. So you're going to build your team, you're going to strengthen all your connections. And even if that team is not maintained throughout your working lifetime, every relationship you build will end up being a foundation for a future situation and will help you get future success. So the best solution is when you can solve the problem by maintaining and building relationships. So now we're going to get to types of problems and solutions. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul, but I don't know how to monitor the chat. So maybe Jason, could you monitor the chat since I've got...
Yeah, I got it. It's fine.
Thank you so much.
And I've got it displayed as well, Sue. So thank you, Sue. All right. So we talked about earlier having problems. I mean, who doesn't have problems? Excuse me. So we're going to do a chatter on this as well. So I want to give you an example of a scenario of a particular problem. And the example scenario is, so let's consider an IT service desk in an organization that processes help tickets.
Excuse me, Paul, are you going to ask them for some causes or just move on to that?
I think I got that coming next. Is that right, Sue?
Okay, got it. Okay.
So with that scenario of processing the help tickets, as the help desk manager, I want to ask the staff members to increase the help response speed or the time so we can close more tickets faster. And with that scenario, I want you to consider what types of problems might prevent them from doing this, and we'll have a chatter on that. So as you're thinking about that, go ahead and be ready to enter something into the chatter, and we'll give you a countdown to do that. All right, so 3, 2, 1. Let's see what possible causes. Is communication, lack of resources, lack of knowledge, complexity, network issues, incomplete process, not organized. Yeah, great. User not responding in a timely manner. Okay, great. So when it comes to categorizing these problems, while it's not all-encompassing, most problems can be divided into these 3 types of categories. The first category being ability, second category being motivational problems, and the third category being interpersonal problems. And we'll talk about each one of these. So when it comes to ability problems, it can be characterized by the saying, I can't do this. And a number of you intimated to this in your chatter that it's a lack of resources. We don't have what we need to be able to solve the problem. And that can be various resources like materials, information, can be the know-how to solve the problem, or the skills and techniques to be able to address the problem, or just a lack of experience, either from yourself or from your team. And so being able to solve an ability problem starts with really asking questions with this, with the intent to seek to understand, really probing what is going on, and listening carefully to those responses to see, is this really an ability problem? Is there really something that's lacking? And what is it? Or are there multiple things that are lacking so that you can go get the resources that you need to solve the problem? In that process, it's really important not to make assumptions, to avoid making assumptions and not jumping to conclusions, and trying to solve the problem before you have a complete understanding. And also, we have to work with others, right? Working collaboratively to identify a solution, the staff members, the IT manager, to really understand and ask what needs to change to be able to solve the problem. And we've got the graphics that show, we've got a decrease in speed. We want to turn that around and increase it. We work collaboratively in our teams and our organizations to upgrade and improve the process. Okay, so next category is motivational problems. And this can be characterized by the saying, I don't want to do this, right? Just unmotivated to be able to address the problem. And there could be a number of reasons for why that is. It could be an inconvenience. It could be a boring or difficult or tedious task, or something that's repetitive you've done many times and you just don't want to take it on again. Or frankly, it could be just completely uninspiring. And so how do we address that to change the interest and the motivation in being able to solve the problem? Again, it starts with asking the questions, what's really going on, and listening to that with the intent to understand, is this really a motivational problem? Still avoiding those assumptions and not jumping to conclusions or solutions until you have that full understanding. And then addressing the motivation in two ways. One is the natural consequences. What is the consequence of the impact of either doing the task or not doing the task? And the imposed consequences is what is the impact on the person or the people by completing or not completing the task. And so this is where you can find the motivation. You can't assume that the other person is interested in collaborating with you to solve it. You need to motivate them. And so motivating them to do the work by communicating the consequences of not doing the task can often provide the inspiration to be able to fulfill the solution. And what's key here too is following up to ensure that an effective solution, what Sue mentioned earlier, solving the problem and maintaining the relationship. So that's it's important that you've actually found once you've found the effective solution, that you maintain the relationship to keep the solution in place and to also provide ongoing motivation to address the problem. Interpersonal problems. Again, this can be characterized by, you can't make me do this, right? And this may be a variety of reasons for this. There could be personality conflicts, having a negative experience with a past experience with a person or team, just not having mutual respect in the relationship, and misunderstandings. I think a number of you talked about that as well. Miscommunications, misunderstandings. How do we get clarity on addressing interpersonal problems? And again, it goes back to the same techniques that we saw for the other two, with the seeking to understand first, asking those questions, listening carefully. Is this really an interpersonal problem? Oftentimes there's going to be emotion with this. There could be hesitancy to want to work with the other people or the other person. or some barriers, as you mentioned earlier, that we need to get past and work through. And so with these strong emotions, it can impact the way that we think logically. Miscommunications and misunderstandings are very common, and the facts associated with those things can be lost or confused as you're working through those types of emotions. Many people are often uncomfortable having or demonstrating feelings, especially in a professional context. Either it's emotions are stuffed, or the emotions are all spilled out all over the table. And so we need to make sure that as we go through those emotions, that we still stick to the facts, don't wander off and have that confusion associated with the emotion, and avoid the compulsion to try to win the argument or be on the right side of the argument, even if you may not be on the right side. Okay, the other part of this too is the fool's choice. It's a term that, when strong feelings can lead you to an unlogical solution. It could be having to choose between two bad options. One of those examples could be either I'm hungry, so I'm either going to steal food, or I'm going to starve to death. And in reality, you don't have to choose between either of those options. There are positive alternative solutions. It can be things like visiting a food bank, or asking a friend or a neighbor for assistance, going to a grocery store or restaurant, seeing if they have any donations. And then when the time is more is better for you in terms of being able to offer something back, you can pay that forward in some way by helping another when you can. So addressing strong emotions. First thing is you got to manage your own emotions. And that's done by staying calm and modeling behaviors that show that you can cope with your emotions. Having pauses in your dialogue, taking deep breaths, really just being calm and collected. And then acknowledging the emotion without judgment. And this is where I think you have to have some empathy to be able to relate to the other person and find some common ground. Asking neutral questions. Again, with seeking to understand and just finding a common place that you can work together to move forward. It could be as simple as, how's everything going? How are you doing? And listening carefully, with really the intent of listening without trying to solve the problem. It's more about focusing on the individual and the relationship and the emotional needs at that time than trying to get to a solution. You want to be able to do that collaboratively and working collectively together, and neutralizing those emotions is a good place to start to begin that problem solving.
Thank you, Paul. And so talking about all those different types of problems and solutions is important. And those are, as Paul was talking about, those are a super big deal for the immediacy of a situation. But for all of you who you are working professionals, you've been somewhere for a long time. And as you know, your colleagues have memories. So what I really want to emphasize, and just to reiterate what Paul said, is these are, if you do this right, you can be developing the foundation for future scenarios where you're going to run into another situation where there's a barrier of some kind or another. And if you can get your colleagues to be your teammates, your allies, rather than feeling like they have to always do the one-up thing, it's just going to be better for everybody and a lot more effective for you. So that makes sense. You know, I sound like a normal person, I think. Why is it so hard to do effective problem solving? Well, first is this effective communication piece. And I think, you know, one of the things we practice a lot as professionals in the technical world is communicating complicated topics and complicated ideas to people who are non-technical. I'm imagining that most of you work with folks from with a different professional background. Maybe they're from sales, or maybe they're your support team, or maybe some of you even work at a university where you might be dealing with people that throw up their hands and say, I can't do this, but they want to do something very specific and they want you to fix it for them. And your responsibility, of course, as that working professional, is to communicate effectively to them what your materials can do, what your technology can do, what you can do, but also to try to understand their problem. All of that, every time you have a conversation, or whether it's through email or Zoom or in person, that helps you build your relationships. And even though you might not work with that person again directly, I work at a relatively big university from the point of view of student enrollment, but in a way, it's not that big when you think about the number of people that are there, faculty, admin support, IT people, facilities people. And it's really nice for me when I contact someone and I say, would you be able to help me with this? I hear you're the go-to person. And they'll get back to me. And when they get back to me, they said, well, I went and asked about you, and I found out this about you. And so I know that that you're a good person to work with, and we'll make this happen. Now, I'm not saying I'm this great person, but I've made it my business to develop relationships with all these different folks, even if they're not in my same technical field. So developing relationships is critical. And as you do that, you're going to be building trust and respect, and people will understand that you're that kind of person that's going to work hard for them. And all of that gets back to our effective problem solving. We're going to be able to solve those problems, and I'm going to say a lot more quickly and effectively, because we've built these relationships, and we're going to, through that solution, then we'll have a common bond, and we've solved that problem together. We maintain and even build that relationship. Communication styles are really, we're so lucky. I am so thrilled that we have an international community here. I am sorry about my dogs. They're communicating in their own style. But I feel like I'm super lucky. We have a really international faculty, and we have a quasi-international student body. And where I live is, they like to use the moniker as the most diverse city west of the Mississippi. So I like that. It's very cool. However, we've got folks coming from different backgrounds, which is a real strength, but it's the yin and the yang of everything, right? This is a strength, but if we're not careful, that could be a weakness. We want to make sure that we don't let people's accents keep us from understanding what they're trying to say to us. Sometimes there are cultural differences. There are a lot of students who are in engineering and computer science. I'm in at College of Engineering and Computer Science, so in technical fields. And some, for religious reasons, can't shake hands. So the men can't shake hands with me as a female, but the female students cannot shake hands with a male professor. That's okay. We acknowledge that, but we don't hold, that's just a cultural difference. Those kinds of things, back when I was a student, way a long time ago, people would hold that against folks. We don't anymore, and that's good. And that keeps us moving forward. The issue really with all of these things is when we don't truly, when we let these little barriers, or when we let these little reasons, pitch of voice, some people talk really, really fast. You know, some people take really long pauses. I don't know if you've had this, and you don't know whether it's your turn or not. And then if you start to speak, they'll say, wait, I wasn't done. You have to be able to take a deep breath and absolutely not let that interfere with your relationship building. We tend to like people and get closer more quickly with people who communicate more like we do. So even in the United States, we have regional differences. You know, people will say, well, those folks who have a Southern drawl, well, maybe they're not quite as smart, or That used to be the thing. Or maybe the people from the East Coast talk way too fast and they're going 90 to nothing and they're not hearing me. But that might not be true. So we have to be really, really, really careful to not let these communication styles have a negative effect on our relationship building. I love this quote. Many of our motives, and they are obvious to us, aren't perceived by the people we talk to. So sometimes rudeness, stubbornness, inconsiderations, or refusal to cooperate really are not that. They're just differences in conversational style. So I thought this might be a time, because we've been emphasizing this, for you to, maybe people could throw in the chat if you've ever had an issue with that some sort of a problem seemed to develop because of a communication style rather than a real problem. Anybody have any situation like this?
Sue, I think we have some time, so we can also take audio.
Yeah.
When anybody wants to speak up or use the chat, you're welcome to use.
Yeah,
I'll jump in if that's fine.
Please. Yes.
I think in terms of communicating, email is so hard to judge tone, and some people, will write with no capitals and just start with "hey," whereas other people will start with "Dear Eric," comma, and use proper grammar. So that's a really hard judgment when you're just reading an email for the first time.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, we'll talk about email coming up a little bit later.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that keeping in mind is not reading emotion into email, because you really don't know, even though the tone, you can try to interpret the tone. That goes back to not making assumptions we talked about earlier and judgments on emotion.
Well, and like I've had a particular, I tell sometimes students will come and sort of fuss at me about this professor or that, you remember being in college and how that is. And I'll listen to them and say, I hear you. And often I'll say to these students, well, you know me, and you know how I am about things and how I spend time working on problems with you. What do you think? Do you think I wanted to be married to that guy? And they look at me and I said, because I'm not married to him. I say, though, I am affected. I mean, when I was hired, and when he was hired after me, we effectively became married because we have to work together. We have to make it all right. And sometimes just because that's the way I communicate, I use analogies like that ends up sort of calming the problem for the students, because they recognize that, I just have to take a step back and understand that this person is coming from a different point of view, a different place. And you maybe can see, I don't know if you can see my face talking, but I really do try to look for the bright side, and I smile a lot and stuff like that. And this particular individual has had real problems with me in the past because he thinks, and this is not true, but he thinks that I'm not taking him seriously. Because if I smile to him and stuff like that, so I've learned with him that I have to really try to keep a very still face, not my usual demeanor, but it's an accommodation that I've made because it unbelievably makes things better. Paul, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'll share some of my experiences. I mentioned in my introduction, I worked in industry for 30 years, and much of that was in the aerospace industry, where I worked on satellite programs for various customers. And oftentimes we end up working on satellites for 7 days a week, for months on end, sometimes 24 hours a day, multiple shifts. And so all those categories of problems, the ability, the interpersonal, the motivational, all those things came into play when you're working that kind of cadence. I think for me, one of the bigger examples that I have is just in terms of communication. Working some of those long hours, people do get tired. Communication is so crucial when you have multiple days or weeks where you're having shift handovers and giving commands and interpreting data and trying to do all that with accuracy. And many of the anomalies that we experience were almost always due to communication, human to human communication. So just working through things like, fatigue and, if there were issues among the team members, resolving those issues so that the team could work together, towards the common goal and common mission. And for me, I was oftentimes customer facing. So I'd have to, status our customer, address these anomalies with them, really finding the right balance in terms of when's the right time to, communicate with the customer about an issue, and making sure that we had the issue understood so that we could communicate that effectively and not misinterpret or give our customer a false impression of something that they really don't need to worry about. That's not as big of an issue. So those are some of my examples. I think also when we're working under stress and pressure, resources can be time and money, right? Is there enough schedule? Is there enough time to do the job the way that it should be done, the way that it needs to be done? Or are there compromises that could be made? And you can end up in that fool's choice of making a bad decision that could compromise an outcome.
And I was going to ask the group, the motivational stuff that Paul was talking about is the piece that I've always had the most difficult with when I'm trying to motivate my colleagues rather than students. With students, you've got kind of a carrot and a stick sort of thing. If you don't do this homework, you're not going to do well on this test. And, when you go out into industry, if you don't know this material, F means fired, not just, you didn't pass the class. So that's a different kind of thing. But it's when somebody just sort of doesn't want to do something and they can't kind of buy your argument. Does anybody have any comments or suggestions or scenarios that they've thought of that help with motivational issues?
I can chime in again.
Oh, good. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, I find that when there's motivational issues like that, and we're going back and forth maybe over, it's usually email, right? Everything is over email. I find it so useful to pick up the phone and talk to someone in person, because you can glean so much more information about what's going on, about why perhaps there's barriers, and help them through over the phone than just a endless chain of back and forth emails.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in just a second too, because the one thing, the pandemic was terrible, of course. I wish we didn't have it, but the one thing for me, from a work point of view, that's been good is now people not just phone, but we can make a real quick Zoom meeting or something, and then you see them, and that's helpful to me. So
yeah,
you're
seeing
right.
and hearing is super important. Yeah,
absolutely. So we're going to talk about the communication practice a little bit, since Eric brought up emails. We're going to talk about really.
We have a hand raised, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's
could
totally
you help me
fine.
with that? I can't see
Hi.
that.
No, that's totally fine. Yeah, go ahead, Dina, please.
Hi, I just want to raise a flag. When I hear a phrase like seeing and hearing is super important, that sets off all my accessibility alarms. Some people can't see, some people can't hear, and some people are wired differently in terms of face and sound processing. I just want people to be mindful of that.
We are, and could you please help us? Because I absolutely don't want anyone to feel like, can you help us with these accessibility? Because since everybody here, everyone in this meeting, and I believe truly everyone that I've encountered in my working life wants to be helpful. They want to solve the problem. Nobody's trying to be obstructive or anything. What would be helpful to you?
checking on what the person you're communicating with, what their preference is. I know
So
some
writing
people,
that
yeah,
email that just asks,
yeah,
would you like to have a phone? I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Please say, please
sure.
say.
Um, uh, I just there is a very strong sort of historic, I would say, bias in the culture in terms of face-to-face vision and sound being assumed as the default. I run into this a lot in interface editors where they assume that if you are a content contributor, you have to be able to see. And just when I hear phrases like, it's so important to do a thing that people with disabilities may or may not be able to do, I want to raise people's awareness of asking the question and finding what the person you're communicating with, what their preferred mechanism is.
Then the last time I went with you with Pratiksha, it wasn't there. I didn't see. Okay.
You know, Dina, that's a very good point. And this is a little bit off topic, but I do want to carry that through because I'm just thinking I'm in the process now of writing a lot of documentation for a new system. And I don't know that I do this specifically, but I can certainly see where I have done it in the past, where even in our writing, like if we're writing a documentation for like a form or something, we might say, and you'll see that there's a checkbox in the upper right or something like that. And I can absolutely see how that is in some way very ableist language. And so thanks for that prompt because that may, cause me to think differently about how we write things like that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. And I really appreciate that because even though all the time I do this with students, would you like to meet in person? Do you prefer to meet in Zoom or would you rather do email? And I always ask them those three things, but I don't with my professional colleagues, and I now will. So thank you, Dina. That's very important. And thank you, Jason, for your comments too. I appreciate that. All right. So we want to talk about having these conversations because just like this conversation we just had now, I hope that we all learned a lot about that. And because I was so excited, I did the wrong thing and I interrupted. So I really apologize, Dina. That was bad on my part. And I will work harder not to do that because everything we do is going to impact the response of that person. We want to make sure we start conversations because then we'll all learn. We don't want to start arguments. So again, I sort of approach these things by saying, if I think I see a problem and I bring a group of folks together to talk about it, I try to say what I think the problem is, and I sometimes do these both sort of at the same time. I say what I think the facts are, what I know about this, and what I wish to be happening, what I want, and earlier in our meeting, we had someone say, the machine isn't doing what I think it should be doing, or something like that. I mean, it was a really good, it was a very, very wonderful comment, but that's just a very important way to start things because then we can parse out, well, what did we think we want it to do, and I deal with a lot of people who deal with loads of big data because we're always looking to see which group of students is doing better. Can we help the students reach their goals more effectively if we try this kind of support system or that kind of, so we have a lot of, I guess you would call them experiments. They're not lab rats or anything like that, but we're working super hard on trying to get the students to their goal the most effectively. And so we work hard with that. But in those kinds of things, particularly in whether we're talking about how to build a bridge, I tell my students, there's in any engineering thing, there's going to be a whole bunch of good solutions. There's usually only one terrible solution. Like if you built a building and it fell down, that's a terrible solution. But there's a lot of good solutions. So what you want to do is make sure that you're communicating the absolute essentials and then figuring out what's kind of the difference between fact and belief. And so expectations and observations are important. And so you want to be able to say, here's where I think we are, here's where I want us to go. And then parse out, why do we think we're here? Like if you've got students who are taking 6 or 7 years to earn their bachelor's degree, why is that happening? What's going on? If that's a fact, then why is that a fact? And then we want to figure out what we can do to help those students graduate more quickly. If they love school, get into a graduate program, all sorts of things like that. So it's really important that we have kind, I use that word a lot, conversations where we really, really listen and we don't say, that's a crazy idea. We don't do things like that. We want to be careful to be open to really listening to what people are saying so that we can incorporate their ideas in the final solution. One of my friends said, when I have a couple of kids, they're all grown up now, but when they were little, people would be saying, don't do this, don't do that, and one of my friends said, that's always seemed odd to her because of her style. She was another technologist. She said, I remember when I was a little kid, my mom would start talking, but it took me a minute to kind of engage. So I would hear spill on the floor. So she would think, why does my mom want me to spill something on the floor? Because she didn't hear the don't part. She heard the voice. So, and I've always thought that is really an important lesson to learn, because that's kind of how little kids are. They remember the last thing they heard, whether it's eat the cookie or, whatever. So we want to be really, really careful to have the last thing we talk about be a positive thing, because the goal is to not put people on the defensive, because as soon as people are on the defensive, then they feel like they have to win, and this isn't something, when we're really trying to be effective problem solvers, there's nothing about winning. So what if you still disagree? This is kind of an interesting topic and something maybe we can get some input from you folks. Our expectations and opinions might be way different, but the goal is working together. And so we need to be able to communicate about these things so we can reach an effective solution. So, can you agree to disagree? Sure. But if you've got people who are still working against you, because that will happen in academia. I don't know if any of you are academics, but there are people who, I don't know, try to don't kind of work within the system. They always are trying to go around, and that can backfire on them, honestly. But mostly you have to, I feel like, work to agree on some sort of a compromise. Even if that's not the solution that everybody wanted, if you can all agree on the central solution, it will be important. It might not be, everybody might not get their way, but it's really okay. And you move on. Because a lot of these things, who remembers what the problems in your department were 5 years ago? They were there, but who remembers what those were? Paul, do you have any comments on this one?
I do, Sue. I think going back to the example I mentioned earlier about customer-facing, customer communications, probably many of you may have that same type of working relationship. And how do you, maintain the relationship, solve the problem, and maintain the relationship in a positive manner? And so the aspect of having the conversation, not the battle, right? It could be a fight or flee type response, and that doesn't solve the problem, right? It's about coming together, working together to reach that common ground and moving forward. And for us working in the satellite business, again, it was about the mission. It was about fulfilling that mission, even though there were challenges, there were barriers. That was the motivation, was fulfilling the mission. And so if you can keep that positive outcome in mind, keep the end in mind of what you're both trying to achieve from either side, that can help you work through reaching the agreement and working through, disagreements or compromises, for the sake of the greater outcome.
And one of the things that if you continue to work hard on building relationships, because I find that one thing that we don't do, at least very much in the engineering world, and certainly in this country, I can't speak, I've worked with people from other countries a lot, but never lived there. So I don't know. But in this country, we don't really acknowledge people's successes. It's not like giving them a prize or anything like that, but saying thank you for that. That was great. I really appreciated that. And you tell them it's specifically what. And often I have found when you're in another sticky situation, you can hearken back to when you had that previous disagreement. You might not need to call it that, but oh, remember when we worked on this, and I wonder if we can use this kind of solution again, or this kind of strategy to get to our best solution. And lots of times people will respond to that, because then that helps them remember that you're working with them with good intent. Like Paul said, you're all trying to complete the mission, right? It's not about, Paul's not ever looking to have his name up in lights in the sky. It's about getting that satellite up there. And so all these things, this kind of figure out where you agree, build on those points, but compare. And if you've built that relationship, you can always compare your perspectives. And I find lots of times if you can bring in the history in a positive way, that's super helpful. So I wonder if any of you have any kind of, again, you can speak to us or you can write it in the chat, comments about how you work with colleagues when there's disagreement, how you get past that. Eric, you're good with this?
Sure, yeah. I think I want to always remember when people seem frustrated with me or we are disagreeing, that it's not two people against each other, right? Like you mentioned earlier, we're not married to each other. This is not a relationship problem. We're both trying to fix the problem at hand, right? So remembering that in the back of your head, that it's you two versus the problem, right? That's kind of, you hear it in like marriage counseling or whatever. It's you two versus the problem, not you two against each other. So bringing it back to that always helps me.
That's excellent.
This is Daryl. I certainly would want to second that if anything, try to bring them to the problem, the idea that you're both looking at a situation you want to handle, maybe from slightly different perspectives. But I would also go out and certainly privately just ask them, hey, have I offended you in any way? And seek reconciliation from that perspective.
I love that. Thank you. Those are both, I'm writing that down so I can use this again. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
These are such important things. And I do feel like, having been a technical professional for almost 50 years now, I feel like, and in this field, I feel like we're doing a lot better job getting stuff done, but also interacting with each other and building a really strong community that's welcoming to the new people. So I love that. Thank you. All right, now we're going to do a little bit of practice about email communications, and I'm hopeful that Dina might put something in the chat if we're missing some things, because it sounds like she's really good at this.
Sue, may I interject really quick?
Yes.
I just wanted to give us a time check. So we're at 9:55. We've got 20 minutes left.
Okay.
And I know we have some examples to work through in here too, and some opportunity for feedback.
Right. So that means for you all, please speak up, write in the chat, do whatever, because we've got just a few. We're going to look at a couple of different kind of email exchanges, because for many of us, email is not, people are getting, I think, way better at this, but it's not sometimes the best. There's a lot of misunderstanding sometimes. So the good thing about email, of course, and I love this, is you can write your email, even if you're angry, you can write your email and not send it. You can write your email and think about it. You can write your email if it's something that you're really passionate about and rearrange it. I love email. I really do. But also if you are, for some people, if you write an email, some people, my brother, for instance, and he's a technical guy in banking. But he was telling me just like last year, he said, this gal is really weird. She writes dear on the front of all of her emails. He says, a proper email in a business should be just the name of the person. And I thought, never, and he's my generation. I mean, I've never heard somebody say that this is just not proper to write it that way. But that's his presumption in his field, I guess. But he's kind of put off right from the beginning. So we want to be careful about emails. So for our purposes, you want to make sure that your email has a purpose. I actually always fill in the subject line, say responding to your or whatever. And then you want to say what's going on, why you're sending this email, that sort of thing. I also will often put in my email body, you'll notice, I don't say you'll notice, I say I've copied in X, Y, and Z, and they're important because of this. So always, and those are in my emails. And then, but you want to avoid that assumption problem. You don't want to think that whether it's a student, a colleague, and your IT support people, you don't want to assume that they really understand what's going on. So our first email example, this is an IT problem. So this is the email. And so the person says, come to me with all questions and comments instead of the IT staff. And then says there's a problem in the system and all that, but everybody's working hard to fix it. So that was the original one. Do you think that there could be some communication or some misunderstandings in there? Maybe?
Yeah, undoubtedly.
Yeah. Here's what we think would be a better, and I picked this one to talk about because I want to mention about the ticketing system, but this would be better. Remind the fact, it's probably a faculty member. The IT is using a ticketing system now, and it keeps us apprised of the problems. It keeps them in the queue and stuff like that. And then acknowledges that the faculty member, I shouldn't say fellow, the faculty member has come several times and is really trying to resolve the problem. Anyone who's worked at a university, and it may be the case for other places in the last, I don't know, even in this century, recognizes that that used to be the way we got things done, is you went and chased down the person who could come help fix it for you. So that this person is not, kind of with the new system. But putting in exactly why the ticketing system is so important it would be very helpful. So it's just giving a lot of information to this faculty member, and so that they will be able to have the assurance that somebody is paying attention and they'll get back to you, because it even says you're going to hear from us within 48 hours. That follow-up, I think, is essential. This is what is going on. This is why we do it. And here's what's going to happen. I usually ask, if you have any more questions, please contact me, as he says right there. But you could put in the contact me and leave I put my phone number or my Zoom or whatever in that too. Any thoughts on this, since you guys are email people?
We're getting some chatter.
Okay.
So horrible email. Email puts the recipient on the defense. Adding phone and email is very good, right? Some sort of contact, right? And then, whether we use the word, the intro of dear versus hello or some other type of greeting with less formality is also being discussed.
Yeah. And I think that's probably something that's going to continue to evolve, So I've got students who write me an email. Hey, Hall. I mean, Hall is my last name, but it's like, what? I would never, back in my day, I would never have done that. I don't care. They're respectful. It's just they feel comfortable. Here's another one. And this is also one I picked. This is personal. This is about interruptions, so writing to a person and saying, I'm sick and tired of you interrupting me during meetings. I'm important. Stop it. And I don't know if you all have ever had this, but so people will sometimes write these emails and they mean to send it just to the person, but they send it to the whole department. We have a fella on our college faculty. So just the college, not the whole university, but just the college. But he will invariably 2 or 3 times a semester send an email like this out to the entire college. So the whole college is kind of getting this airing of dirty laundry, and it's just, we don't know the context or anything like that. So this is an email that would not be good to send, even if you're frustrated with someone. What we think would be far better is to say something like this. This is a little more formal than I might do, but the ground rules for our weekly meetings are this. So we want everyone to be able to participate in the conversation. But this part is really important that we put in. I noticed that I was interrupted twice. So I didn't get to fully explain what I was going to do. And then rather than putting them on the defensive by saying, please stop, then saying, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to have this amount of time or whatever. I'd really like to be able to present my whole project. And I'd like to be allocated the time to do that. And I feel like these are the kinds of things that sometimes people forget, that follow-up. Here's what I would like to see, and you put it in there like that, and that's really I don't think that's offensive. I think it's just stating what you'd like to see happen. And then you see, that doesn't mean everybody's going to approve of your project or anything. It's just giving you the time to speak, because that also gets back to our conversation about differences in speaking style. I have personally had times when I thought I was being super clear. I mean, I would say, here's what I think is going on, and here's what I think the solution would be. And people would look at me like, what? This was in faculty senate. This was a multi-discipline based thing, a faculty senate executive committee meeting. And the president of the campus would be meeting with us, and he would always look at me and say, oh, you're an engineer. I don't understand you. And then a colleague, a mathematician, would say what I thought was exactly the same thing. And everyone would say, oh, I get it. That's so clear. Sue needs an interpreter. And so I've really tried hard on this, but if I'm not being clear, that's why we have this: expectations, observations, natural, the consequences. And this isn't really a consequence here, I don't think, but it is really what you were trying to do. So anyway, are there any comments on this one there, Paul?
Yeah, I think the aspect of the interruption. It's different if the interruption is coming from a boss versus a peer, or from a man to a
Oh,
woman. Um, and so just kind of interpreting the email, and how to respond to it. I think the other thing that stands out for me with this one is you could see the message is pretty abrupt. And sometimes I think our communication styles have evolved to be more crisp and concise and curt. In some cases, when we're talking about texting versus chats versus emails, right? And so when you read something like this, it's short, direct, to the point, and not very sensitive. It's almost like that emotional response, that strong emotion that we talked about earlier, coming across, in just a quick message without a lot of thought to the other person or the recipient put into mind.
yeah.
Paul, if I could add to that for just one quick sec, I do want to
Yeah.
call out, you mentioned it, and Ruth also mentioned it in the chat, and I think it's worth bringing up. There's nothing we can necessarily do to solve this, and I think in general we have gotten better about it, but there's still a lot of work to do. It is worth reminding everyone, which I think we all recognize intuitively, and we've probably all unfortunately seen examples of this, that as you said, you know, men interrupting people or speaking more or being more aggressive, it doesn't matter whether it's in meetings or in emails or any kind of communication, has unfortunately been perceived differently as women doing the same thing, right? Women are often accused of being emotional or, uppity or reactive or whatever, and men, on the other hand, are, considered to be authoritative, or they're taking charge, or they're being responsible. And it's super unfortunate, and that translates into these, awful issues where there's differential reactions and acceptance of people making these, errors in communication styles. So it's
Yeah.
definitely worth calling out again.
Thank you. That's great, Jason. All right, we have I think only about 7 or 8 more minutes. So we want to maybe move on to the next one. What's going on here? Why is my slide not moving? There we go. This is
Okay,
for
yeah.
Paul.
So I'll take the next two. So this is an example of what we call sandwiching, and sometimes I do this myself. But you can see the email basically has mixed messages in it, and it's lacking some of the formulaic content that we talked about earlier. So liking the energy, but I noticed you stopped writing the weekly reports. Need those, but you created a wonderful workspace. Keep up the good work. And so Alexis, is taking this input from Sage, is getting a mixed message, but not really the direct message. And so I think one of the things that's clear that's missing from this, there is a weak expectation. We really need them. And here in the correction, you can see that it's expected to be submitted on a weekly progress report. And haven't received that in the last couple of weeks. The consequence of that, and then the big piece, the component that was missing, was the follow-up. And sometimes with the sandwiching, because you may be leading with the positive and ending with the positive, or leading with the negative and ending with the negative, the follow-up can be, absent. And so this was crucial with this one, is scheduling that appointment with the timeline so that a discussion can happen about the progress. Has anybody seen these types of emails or write these type of emails?
Yeah, that was a common thing they were teaching us maybe 20 years ago, I think. Okay. Oh, somebody says.
The compliment sandwich. Good for kids, not for adults.
Oh,
Yeah. Right. And even if in an academic setting, right? What about for college students? I think we need to think about that as well, the proper motivations.
yeah. So speaking of students, here's our last email, and then we'll have a quick wrap up.
Yeah, so the student intern. Here again, the example is the observation, not spending enough time. You need to put in the time that's needed, or let them know so I can hire a different student to take your place, right? And so here you can see that it's leaning in pretty aggressively. Not sure how Harley's going to take that in terms of the consequence, right? And so now there's more clarity put onto the observations and the expectations. So there's a time frame. There's an observation that occurred, outside of the expected time frame. And so the consequence of that was missing in the previous email, as well as the follow-up. The invitation to come to the office and talk through it, have that conversation with the time that is the person is expected to be in the office.
Yeah, and I really like this one because you don't say you're going to get fired. You give a reason. Since you weren't at your desk, it's not since you weren't at your desk. I'm assuming you were just sloughing off or something like that. This is more about, well, I couldn't talk to you about some important thing. So.
Mhm. Yeah, and also the observation doesn't have the context. Was there a reason for why they weren't there at their desk?
Right.
Without seeking to understand that first, jumping to the conclusion or the solution or assumption that they'll have to hire a different student.
Yeah. There are a lot of really important things, but we are nearing the end of our time, and I wonder if so these are our learning goals, and I wonder if anybody has anything they'd like to say about the presentation, things that you thought about, things that we might add. I mean, I've got a few things just from these conversations that I think are really important that I will add to the presentation about being mindful of the way people want to communicate and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think also, you have different communication styles, different preferences, different abilities, and knowing how to connect with other people using various styles, techniques, preferences. We had to have those in our toolkit to be able to make those connections and work through problems and solutions.
Yeah. I feel like I do, like Jason was saying, I think it was Jason, but we are moving in the right direction, but there's still a long way to go. There are differences around the world and differences just within the country and within a particular company. I have heard when I first was getting involved with campus-wide stuff at my campus. So this is a long time ago. This is in the 1980s. So a long time ago. But I was one of only a few women on campus who were faculty, and people presumed that since I was from engineering, it was a terrible place to be as a female. But it turns out it was the best because they didn't care what you looked like, they just needed you to do the job. It was always, and I worked at Sandia Labs and Lawrence Livermore National Labs, and they were like that, here's your job, here's where we're going, you're part of the team, get this job done. But the English faculty and the education faculty, the females there had the hardest problems, and it's better now. So that's how since we all deal with folks from a variety of backgrounds, we want to be mindful and respectful. So I appreciate all your input. Paul, do you have a summative statement?
I don't. Sue, I think you've done a great job summarizing the learning goals. I think we're at time. Anybody has any final thoughts or parting comments, please feel free to say those or type those into the chat.
Yeah, because the chat will go on, and I'm going to stop sharing now, and then we can give you back to Henry and you'll go on. Now I can see the chat. Thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, Henry.
Okay, let me shut off the recording.